Hello, everyone. My name is Sheila Sutton with the Metropolitan Planning Council, and we thank you for being here at the first event of this year's Drinking Water 123 Academy. Our sessions this year are living under a thematic banner of shared solutions for a universal resource. I'm sure you'd agree that anyone and everyone who calls the Chicago region home deserves access to clean drinking water. But like so many things in our region, access varies from community to community. This curriculum is all about information sharing, coming together to solve problems of affordability, of lead service line replacement, and of inequitable access. The goal is to build a community of efficacy around these important issues and to make a difference. So before we get started, I have some brief housekeeping items. First, please use the chat box for general conversation and remarks. But if you have a question for the presenters, please use the Q&A button. If you need captioning today, use the CC button here in the Zoom to utilize English captions. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Metropolitan Planning Council, or MPC, as I'll be referring to our organization throughout, MPC is an independent planning organization working to address regional built environment issues through a racial and economic justice lens. Our goal is a thriving Chicago region for all residents. Simply put, we build equity into the environment. The work we do is grounded in 3 pillars: thriving communities, equitable infrastructure, and just public systems. And our work is, of course, intersectional across planning and development, sustainability, and government and other program areas. The water issues we'll be discussing today, of course, flow, haha, pun intended. There'll be a lot of water puns through several of these. If you're interested in learning more about what we do, you can do that at metroplanning.org. There will be a link in the chat. Now, since water is what brings us all here today, let me give you a brief overview of our Drinking Water 123 initiative. Starting in 2017, MPC released the Drinking Water 123 Guide. This guide was aimed primarily at elected officials and municipal staff. Now, we assume that most elected officials, just like when I started at MPC, don't have a background in water resources management. But we worked with the experts in the field to provide an overview of our region's water sources and the infrastructure required to deliver it. Information on drinking water management and the relevant laws, and some of the major issues like supply constraints and contamination and aging infrastructure. The Go chapter of our resource explains what you should do with that information. You can read all about it on the link that's on the screen, and we also have that in the chat. The Drinking Water 123 Academy brings our Drinking Water 123 Guide to life. In past years, we have held both in-person and virtual sessions around the region with interactive educational events that engage timely topics with plain language information and resources. So again, today is session 1 of our 2023 Drinking Water 123 Academy. The rest of our series includes next week's virtual event and one in-person gathering in December. Today's session focuses on level setting for the most pressing issues in drinking water in our region. And session 2 is happening next week at the same time and features the voices of mayors and public and directors of public works who are problem-solving challenges in drinking water. Finally, our third session, Meeting Each Other and Meeting the Drinking Water Challenge, is a face-to-face opportunity for municipal representatives and other key stakeholders to network and engage. For today, we have an exciting, jam-packed agenda. First, Jeannie Kruger of Arcadis, our presenting sponsor, will give us an overview of big issues in drinking water in our region. Then Nadan Singh of the Illinois EPA will discuss drinking water infrastructure funding opportunities. How do we pay for all this infrastructure that gets us safe, clean drinking water? Next, we will have a short panel discussion on drinking water regulatory updates. This will include information on the latest in lead service line replacement, the lead copper rule revision, and emerging challenges regarding PFAs. If you don't know what those are, you will at the end of this session. In our second hour, our panel discussion will talk about pressing issues in water affordability in the region and best practices to address billing issues. Finally, we have a brief presentation from Dave Cohn of the Chicago Department of Water Management regarding their rollout of two exciting new projects, the cost of service rate methodology and the Chicago Water Partners Advisory Council. It's an ambitious agenda, and it may feel a bit like drinking from a fire hose. There'll be more of those. But we will provide links to resources and contact information for speakers. And now I will turn the mic over to Jeannie Kruger, Vice President and Chicago Area Manager for Arcadis.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for attending the Drinking Water 123 Academy. At first glance, the state of drinking water seems pretty dismal if you look at all the issues that I've outlined on our slide here. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. And, you know, especially with all the news articles on lead and PFAS that really seem to aim to scare our residents. In many places in Illinois, our water and sewer mains are not only nearing the end of their useful life, but they're also crumbling. There are new laws regarding the removal of lead in water being introduced without adequate funding to accomplish all that is needed. And what the heck do those requirements mean anyway? I mean, who has time to read 500 pages of legislation? Do you? I know I don't. Now we add the monumental task of tackling PFAS while replacing lead service lines, which is no small feat, which were banned much too late across much of the United States. To top things off, there's widespread labor and material shortages hindering construction efforts. Have I rained on the parade yet? Well, I don't mean to, but I'm sure that you'll agree that circumstances feel a bit overwhelming these days. I may have laid it on a little thick, but there are issues that are currently very real and very challenging in the drinking water industry. But there's hope and there's help. Today, we'll hear from seasoned experts in their field of expertise involving funding opportunities, compliance, and educational programs. And I hope you get inspired by what you hear. When you break down the issues and learn best practices from these talented folks, hopefully the task ahead will feel much less daunting, and you'll realize that you are not alone. Help is here. Arcadis is so pleased to be able to sponsor Metropolitan Planning Council's Drinking Water 123 Academy event. We're currently working with Cook County's Build Up Cook program to provide funding assistance and expertise in water, stormwater, and the elimination of lead service lines in 26 communities. And that's just a start. So enjoy your session. And now I'm going to hand this back to Sheila.
Thank you, Jeannie, for this informative overview. And thank you to Arcadis for helping make this event possible. We often take for granted that when we turn on our faucets, clean drinking water is always available. Over the course of our three-part series, our speakers are going to share with us important strategies to meet these challenges and to keep our water flowing. Jeannie will join us at 10:55 for our question and answer session. So please put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will see them, and we will get to those during that time. Our next presentation focuses on funding available through the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency for drinking water infrastructure. We hope you will gain a general understanding of what a revolving loan fund is and what is required to apply for them. Our speaker is Nadan Singh, MBA Deputy Manager and in the Infrastructure Financial Assistance section of the Water Bureau of the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. Links to his bio are in the chat. I will now pass the mic to Nadan.
Thank you, Sheila, and good morning, everybody. I'm here to give you an overview of our Illinois State Revolving Fund and talk about some of the hot topics that we're discussing this year and what the funding structure will look like, some of the funding programs that are available through the Illinois SRF program. So next slide, please. There you go. I just want to start off with what does it mean when we say state revolving fund? If you can click for me one more time, thank you. So when we talk about the state revolving fund, there are two programs that fall under the state revolving fund umbrella. The first one is the Clean Water Loan Program, that is also known as the Water Pollution Control Loan Program. Then we have the Drinking Water Loan Program, which is also known as the Public Water Supply Loan Program. And under the umbrella of Drinking Water Loan Program, this is where the lead program sits as well. So lead is part of the Drinking Water Loan Program. Next slide, please. This is a table that describes what the funding structure looks like for the Illinois SRF when we talk about President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, commonly known as BIL or IIJA. So as you can see, in a normal year for SRF, we used to receive 2 federal grants from the US EPA. We used to receive 1 grant for drinking water, and then we used to receive 1 grant for clean water. Now, thanks to BIL, we have 5 additional grants that are coming into our program, and they started back in 2022, and we expect them to continue through 2026. The 5 additional grants that are broken out are Clean Water Supplemental, Drinking Water Supplemental, Merging Contaminants, they're both for clean water and drinking water, and then Lead Service Line Grant, which is strictly related to the Drinking Water Loan Program. I want to shift your focus to the lead service line funding that's coming into the program. As you can see, year 1, we expected to receive $107 million. And then next year, that funding is expected to more than double to $230 million. So when it's all said and done, when BIL is over, the program will look to receive closer to $2 billion in additional funding than outside of the regular base grants that we used to receive from US EPA. I want to talk a little bit about the fiscal year 24 principal forgiveness caps that we have. The reason we put caps on our funding is because the demand in Illinois for funding is through the roof. And we want to make sure that we can reach as many people as possible. So that is the reason why we put caps in place. So this year, our regular drinking water cap is $1.65 million per loan. The drinking water lead cap is $2.8 million in loan. And then wastewater is $5 million per loan. Along with that, we have passed a new disadvantaged community definition, which I'll talk a little bit more later on. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention that we have taken the step to change our disadvantaged community definition, and it's only applicable to the lead service line funding. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide, please. This slide gives you an idea of what the funding levels look like in our program. This is a trend analysis of the last 5 years. I'll shift your focus to fiscal year 2023. Our fiscal years tend to run from July 1st to the June 30th of the following year. So fiscal year 23 ended last June 30th, and the blue bar represents our clean water program, and then the orange bar represents the drinking water program, and then the gray bar now represents the lead service line funding. As I mentioned before, lead service line is part of our drinking water loan program, but I thought it was beneficial for me to break out lead separately because we're not only getting separate funding for lead, but it also seems to be a really important topic for Illinois. And it's going to continue to be an important topic for the next decade. Some estimates put lead service line problem in Illinois to be anywhere from $8 to $10 billion. I think with the funding that we're starting to receive from the feds, it is just starting to scratch the surface now. We obviously need a lot more help, but we're so glad that we're getting the funding that we're receiving today. The little box on top right is the interest rates that the SRF loan program offers. So in the current year, which is now fiscal year 2024, if you did not qualify for any additional incentives, our base interest rate on our loans is 1.81%. If you compare that to last year, it's a bit higher, but that is because of the financial markets. We are all aware the feds have raised the rates multiple times, and that has also impacted our interest rate structure as well. But we're still proud to tell the folks in Illinois that we still are able to offer interests that are well below 2%. And I think this is probably one of the best deals, if not the best deal out there when it comes to interest rates. Next slide, please. Here I talk a little bit about how you can qualify for additional interest rate subsidy. It depends on, there are two different ways that you can basically qualify for additional subsidy through our interest rates. One is a small community rate where we take 75% of the base rate. So last year, that was 0.93%. So this year, as you may recall, our interest rate is 1.81%. We would apply a 25% discount on top of that. So your small community rate this year will be 1.36%. How do you qualify for a small community rate? You must have a service population of less than 25,000 people. And then I want to make this very clear that even though we have 3 bullet points listed below, you only need to satisfy one of the 3. That could be your median household income, or MHI, has to be less than the Illinois state average. Your unemployment rate has to be greater than the state average, or your monthly user charge has to be greater than 1% of the median household income. Again, you only have to satisfy one of these 3 bullet points, and as long as you have your population of less than 25,000, your application will be considered for a discounted interest rate. The second option we have available is a hardship rate, which is just a flat 1% rate all around. And these are geared more towards smaller systems, so your service population has to be less than 10,000 people. And again, you only have to satisfy one of the following 3 criteria. MHI has to be less than 70% of the state MHI. Unemployment rate has to be 3% greater than state's average. And then lastly, your monthly user charge has to be greater than 1.5% of MHI. So these are just additional subsidies that the program offers. These are very popular terms because not only is our base rate small to begin with, but on top of that, if you qualify for these additional subsidies, you can even get a smaller rate from us. Next slide, please. So recently, we took part in the Lead Service Line Inventory Grant Program. The agency so far to date has made 3 rounds of inventory grant programs. As many of you are aware, the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act requires owners and operators of community water supplies to develop, implement, and maintain a comprehensive water service line material inventory and a replacement plan. And to assist communities in achieving those milestones and targets, we have made available 3 rounds of inventory funding. So to assist communities in meeting the inventory requirements set by the state and federal law, the IEPA has provided $2 million in round 1. The demand was through the roof, so we decided to make round 2 available for $5 million. We spent the $5 million, demand was still very high, so we decided to make round 3 available for $10 million. Round 3 just ended on October 10th, but we do have some money left over from this round, so there's going to be more details to come on what we're going to do with that leftover funding. We may make round 4 available, or we may do something else with the funding, but that is to be decided, but something will happen for sure. To give you a metric estimate of what the round 3 applications look like, we received a total of 94 total applications across Illinois, and that amounted to $3.4 million in total grant funding that we gave to communities to conduct their inventory analysis. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, the agency took part in updating their new lead service line rules. This is where we update our disadvantaged community definition, and this is strictly only applicable to the bill lead service line funding. So going forward, the project area will be determined by the census tracts where lead service lines are being replaced. And what is a disadvantaged community now under the new rule, you may ask? That is strictly a community water supply system which has a lead service line inventory, has lead service lines that need replaced, and has submitted an application for funding for a project area where the MHI is less than 100% of the state average MHI. So anytime a community will request bill lead service line funding from us, their application will be analyzed for a disadvantaged community determination. And we'll make that determination for each application submitted to the agency. The funding cycle and the application process will be the same as a regular public water supply loan program. Many of you have participated in the SRF program before, so you're very familiar with our application structure. That will not change. That will stay relatively the same. State and federal guidelines remain the same. It's just the way we look at your definition, the way we look at your application, excuse me, and the way we score your application will tremendously change under the new rules. Under the new rules, if you are a disadvantaged community, you will have the opportunity to take out a loan that is up to 40 years in loan terms. And if you're considered not a disadvantaged community, you can take out a loan for up to 30-year loan term. All loans will be interest-free. There are 0% interest loans. There will be no interest charged on these loans that were issued under the new rule. And a lot of people will ask me, when is the effective date for this rule? It is currently making its way through the legal proceedings, and it is close to being finalized. We don't have a date yet, but if I was to guess, by the end of the year, we would expect to see this rule come into play, and then we would make that effective as soon as the rules are adopted. Next slide, please. So how does the priority scoring look when we receive your application for lead service line funding under the new bill law? The applicant will identify the census tracts of the project area from the Bureau of Census, and then the agency will then score and rank your application based on the following 7 criteria. What are those criteria? They're your median household income. We'll look at children under the age of 6 in a household or in your census tract, your poverty rate, your social security rate, supplemental security income, any houses that were built pre-1990, and then lastly, we'll also look at your lead service line burden. I want to make a key point here. For lead service line burden, it is crucial for you to have your inventory in order, because that is what's going to help you determine how much lead service line issues you have in your community, and we'll score your application according to those results. Next slide, please. This is a timeline of the inventory and replacement that is expected of each community going forward. As we know, the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act requires each community to meet these deadlines. So April 15th of 2023 was when your initial inventory was due to the agency. And then same following year in 2024, that is when your complete material inventory is due. Now, considering we're in November of 2023, we don't have very much time left until the 15th of April 2024 deadline. So that is why you're seeing all these inventory grant programs becoming available, because we do want to assist communities in meeting these deadlines. So on 15th of January of 2024, if you feel you're in a position where you need to request an extension, that is when your extension to us should be submitted by. Because in 15th of April of 2025 and 2026, we're expecting communities to submit their replacement plans to the agency. And then, of course, the clock starts ticking in April 15th of 2027. So depending on how many lead service lines you have in your community, the higher the number of lead service lines, the more time you have to replace those in your community. So I think, for example, if you're in Chicago or near Chicago, Chicago is a community that has more than, I think, 100,000 lead service lines. They're going to have up to 34 years to replace all those lines. But we want to help you along the way to meet these milestones, and that is why you're seeing all these new funding programs become available. And we encourage communities to not wait and come to us now when today we have the funds available to help you. A lot of times we see communities want to wait till next year because they think more funding will be available. That may not necessarily be the case, although more funding may be available, but we don't know that. That is a speculation at this point. So we're encouraging communities to get ahead of the game and start applying to us now, start asking those questions to us now so that we can help you, because we are in that position today given the funding we have available. And then, of course, on April of 2027, as I said before, that's when the clock really starts ticking for Illinois. All the people will have, timeline will be from April 15th of 2027, depending on how many lead service lines you have available. And yes, David, to your question, Chicago has close to 400,000, but the way the act is written, it is categorizing anything outside of anything more than 100,000 lead service lines is classified as one. But you're absolutely correct that Chicago has close to 400,000 lead service lines. Next slide, please. This is my contact information. A lot of you have worked with Gary Bingenheimer. He is my boss. I'm his deputy section manager. So we encourage folks to reach out to us all the time if you have any funding questions or if you have any other SRF related questions. I know this presentation is geared more towards the drinking water loan program, but of course we have the wastewater side as well. So if you have questions on that front too, we encourage you to reach out to us. One thing I will say is it is very good to see that some additional funding has started to come Illinois' way. As I mentioned before, I think our need to address this lead service line problem in Illinois is anywhere ranging from $8 to $10 billion. But the fact that we're starting to receive additional funding tells me that we're starting to head in the right direction. We're starting to have the appropriate conversations that we need. But of course, we need more help when it comes to finances, some financial resources. So we're talking to Congress now, we're talking to the right folks now to get their attention on this issue. And of course, we need your support in sort of achieving that goal as well of getting Illinois rid of lead service lines. So with that, I will pass it back on to Sheila, and she will take it from here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nadan, for this incredibly important information on funding drinking water infrastructure through state revolving loan funds, and especially highlighting the funding that's available for lead service line replacement support. We all have to be swimming in the same direction on this to get this work done, and it will take time. For municipal representatives listening in on this webinar, we invite you to register for our December 7th in-person event, where Nadan and his colleague Gary will present more on this topic, and you can workshop your SRF questions with them directly. At 10:55, we will have a question and answer section where Nadan and Jeannie and the other panelists from our next session will answer your questions that you put into the chat or you put into the Q&A box. I'm going to turn this section now over to Ruth Kersey of Elevate for a panel on regulatory updates. So I wish us all the best of luck in this section. This is going to be fun and interesting. Don't get scared. We can solve these problems, but we have to work together to do it. So Ruth, passing the mic to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Sheila. So hello, everyone. As Sheila mentioned, I'm Ruth Kersey. I'm the Senior Project Manager for Elevate and also the manager of the new Cook County Technical Assistance Program for lead service line replacement, also known as Cook County TAP, which is coming online here. And I want you to look for more information and communications from Cook County TAP in the near future as we develop our website and the programs to better address the needs of the Cook County community, and as you move on to replacing your lead service line. So a lot of the information you're receiving here will be provided again through Cook County TAP, but directed towards Cook County communities in particular. So I'm excited to be hosting this session, and we can go ahead to the next slide, which I think shows Cook County TAP. There you go. There's our logo and a little information about it. But really, I'm excited to be hosting this session, which is designed to provide you, the audience, a general understanding of current and emergent regulatory environment regarding two important toxins, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, as often we understand it, in the general vernacular, and lead. Our panelists will briefly address best practices for control and pitfalls of implementing those regulations. So our speakers today are going to be Carolyn Greaves, Director of the Illinois section of the American Water Works Association and Vice President of Business Development at Baxter and Woodman Incorporated. And then Adam Nutt is with Lead and Copper. He's a Lead and Copper Coordinator, Compliance Assurance Section in the Bureau of Water of the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. So you can see the links to their bios in the chat if you want to hear more about them. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Carolyn. So take it away to talk about the emergent contaminant PFAS.
All right, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Appreciate being invited here to present. As we get started, like Ruth said, we're going to give a little bit of an overview of PFAS and what that is and why that's important to be having this conversation at this time when we're thinking about water. We could go to the next slide. I would like to start a little bit with a disclaimer. When I started school, I thought, I want to be a chemical engineer. Chem 107 convinced me that maybe not. Environmental engineering was more my fit. So that being said, I'm not a chemist, but we have been tracking what PFAS is and what it means with regards to water systems, and why this is really important. So per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, are also known as PFAS, are a family of over 9,000 man-made chemicals. When I was putting this presentation together, I did a quick Google search for PFAS topics, and immediately these three here on the right came up as current discussions that are happening in our industry about PFAS. And you may have heard them being referred to as forever chemicals, and they're everywhere, and what we should know about them. How we're starting to find them in some of the groundwater, how we're starting to see them in our communities and what to do. You know, very quickly we can see just by looking through some headlines, this is really a very relevant topic to be tracking. You can go to the next slide, please. So what does this mean? Where do they come from? And I want to take a step back just to share that PFAS are man-made chemicals. They've been around since at least the 1950s. I think there's some proof maybe even in the 1940s. We were creating these chemicals. They're really were handy chemicals for helping create stain and repellent clothing, putting it as part of some packaging, being water resistant in terms of our raincoats, different types of elements that we use on our common everyday substances. They are used or used to be used in firefighting foam. They have been used in a lot of products that we take for granted that we've all been utilizing in our daily lives. And what we've been seeing is, according to the CDC, maybe 97% of Americans now have some level of PFAS in our bloodstream. And that's kind of an overwhelming number when you think about it. But it is important to note that this has become such a relevant part of our day-to-day of using products that may have used this, that just being exposed to those products by product use, food packaging use has really resulted in that. But in addition, we're seeing that we're starting to find PFAS in our water supply systems as well. So we're thinking about 20% of exposure comes from water, whereas about 80% of exposure comes from the pathways of just general use. What else is really interesting, I think, about PFAS is such a small level. We look at tracking PFAS by parts per trillion, very, very small. So just a drop in an Olympic-sized pool is the level of PFAS that we are tracking in our water supplies. And as we'll talk about that if you hit the next slide for me. So one thing I wanted to point out is while we are knowing that PFAS exists in a lot of our products, and I mentioned we're starting to see in some of our drinking water supplies, that there is some data out there to help us be more educated and ready to answer some questions from our consumers and customers. IEPA, Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, did do a project back in 2020 and 2021 where they sampled all of the drinking water supplies in Illinois. There's a link that we'll provide that you can find this, but they've created a dashboard where you can quickly go online and see what your community, what they found for your community. And in the overall over 1,400 systems that were sampled, they found about 149 had some sort of detect. At that time, they required those utilities provide some public education, maybe do some additional sampling, but there is no current regulation on PFAS. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. But just so you could have that information, I wanted to share that you could pull up this dashboard and take a look at where the finished water in your community or utility lies in terms of PFAS. If you want to go to the next slide. So upcoming regulations, this is something that is obviously extremely important for us to understand. Earlier this year, US EPA proposed some draft maximum contaminant levels. So this is the limit of what should be going to our consumers in our drinking water of 4 parts per trillion, as well as a health index for a couple of the different elements of PFAS. That rule is not final yet. We're still waiting for that to be finalized, and we'll see what that impact will be on our water industry. We are hoping to hear by the end of this year if that could be finalized. We're also starting to see on the wastewater side, in particular in Illinois, some language to start understanding where PFAS may be coming from in your community, identifying what could be potential sources so you could reduce it at the source, starting to monitor on the wastewater side. So on both the water and wastewater sides, we're really just starting to get our arms wrapped around what the impact of PFAS is. If you go to the next slide. And of course, this obviously has an element of where it could cost, what it could cost our industry. AWWA predicts we'll need about $30 billion for treatment on both the water and wastewater side. At this point, US EPA has allocated about $3.4 billion. So as you can tell, a little bit of a discrepancy between potential need and potential availability. So we're hoping that conversation continues to be able to find more funding opportunities for municipalities. The next slide, please. So last but not least, what does that mean to us? Like I mentioned, we are waiting for the rule to be finalized to see what those limits are, what the timing is, whether or not we're going to need to start implementing treatment at our water treatment facilities, at our wastewater facilities. Hopefully more funding mechanisms be identified. And then we'll have to start making those plans to comply with the regulations. I think one key element of all of this is public education messaging. We want to make sure we're able to provide information to our public so they understand what this means. And there is ongoing research on the public health impacts of PFAS. This is something that's evolving right now. And another very important element is collaborative efforts with the chemical manufacturers. Again, finding where the source of supply is and seeing if they could be contributing to the solutions. So with that, that was a quick overview on PFAS. I am going to pass the mic on to Adam Nutt, who's going to be talking about lead services. Here's some resources up here on the slide, and we'll be able to provide those as well to everyone at the end of this conversation today. Okay, you want to take it away, Adam?
Thank you, Carolyn. So I would like to start off with just a brief reminder of the lead and copper rule update that's coming. That's the lead and copper rule revisions, or LCRR. That's going to be adopted into the Illinois law in December 2023. And then we will be beginning compliance and enforcement on those updates in October of 2024. I'd like to go over just a brief summary of some of the major changes in the LCRR. There are quite a few, and I don't want to take the whole presentation going over all of them. So the highlights are it's going to add a lead trigger level of 10 parts per billion. That's going to be separate from the lead action level. It'll have some additional compliance steps, such as corrosion control treatment studies that you would have to do at 10 parts per billion now instead of the 15. It'll additionally add that all systems with lead service lines will go back to the 6-month standard monitoring starting in January of 2025. That's just across the board. Every system that has any lead service lines, galvanized requiring replacement, or unknowns, since we will be counting those as lead in their final inventory, they will be going back to the 6-month monitoring in 2025. It is also going to specify that systems with those lead service lines can only use sample sites served by a lead service line for their routine lead and copper samples. those lead and copper samples that are from sites served by a lead service line will now be in a 5th liter draw. So that's going to look like the lab will send you a 5-bottle set numbered consecutively from 1 to 5. The sample site will then fill the first bottle that'll be used for the copper analysis. They'll continue to fill bottles until the 5th is filled, and that 5th liter bottle will be used for the lead sample. It's also going to add some find and fix requirements for those individual sample sites that come back over the lead action level. So that way there's a tangible course to correct those high level sample sites. It'll also be adding the requirement that the public education for a lead action level exceedance must now be issued 24 hours after the system is notified instead of the 60 days. And the final major addition is going to add filter distribution for every single lead service line replacement conducted. Next slide, please. I'm just going to touch again. The LCRR, or lead and copper rule revisions, will be adopted in December 2023, and the compliance and enforcement will begin in October 2024. Next slide, please. I want to touch a little bit on inventory and replacement. The initial inventory was due April 15th, 2023 this year. The final material inventory is going to be due next year, April 15th, 2024. On the same day, April 15th, 2024, your initial lead service line replacement plan will also be due. And extension requests for both the final material inventory and the lead service line replacement plan must be submitted by January 15th, 2024. And those can be submitted via email to either myself directly or to the lead and copper inbox that I'll show on the next slide. Can we go back real quick? The revised replacement plans are going to be due April 15th, 2025 and April 15th, 2026. These plans are going to be living documents that we will work with you to update as we go on until the final lead service line replacement plan will be due April 15th, 2027, which is the same day that the mandatory lead service line replacement will begin. Next slide, please. This is our contact information for the lead and copper team at the Illinois EPA. Please, if you have any questions, extension requests, or anything else that you may need for lead and copper, please feel free to email us. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic back to Ruth.
Great. Thank you, both of our speakers. That was really informative. And we have a few questions here for you. And then if anybody has additional questions that they'd like to provide to our speakers, please go ahead and put it in the question and answer panel. So I'll start with Carolyn. So a quick question about PFAS, and you touched on this a little bit in your presentation, but what do you think are the next regulatory steps going forward, sort of as you see them?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I think US EPA will have to finalize their regulations, and we'll see what that impact is. Again, we're hoping by the end of this year, we'll see that come through and understand what that timing is and what that level is. I think in the meantime, water utilities should start doing some of their own testing and get their best available information so they know where they fall with this regulation. There hopefully will be some time to put some plans together if there's some requirements. And again, like I mentioned before, hopefully some funding that could help with any implementation of treatment.
Great. And then thank you for that. I'm just going to check the Q&A, see what's in here. This is more of a lone question, so I'll save that. So for Adam, we wanted to talk a little bit about how the regulatory landscape has affected people's understandings of the lead service line issue. So I'm sorry, let me pull up this one additional question I saw. So there's been a huge surge in elevating the public's awareness on lead service line issues ever since Flint, Michigan happened. And I was wondering, how has the current regulatory environment contributed to that awareness of the lead service line issue? And what impact is it having on the regulatory community in general?
So I think we're beginning to see the impact that it's having with the release of those lead and copper rule revisions that really put a focus on source water changes and any sort of treatment change and the effect that can have in the distribution system. So that's why we'll see with that lead and copper, those lead and copper rule revisions, increased monitoring for any sort of source water change, and then corrosion control treatment studies and additional steps in that corrosion control treatment process that'll really increase monitoring and let us identify any problems long before they get to the point of Flint, Michigan.
Thank you for that. And then one other question here, the federal lead and copper rule, and you've touched on this in your presentation, so just another reiteration of it a little bit, but the federal lead and copper rule will be updated as of October 24th. So you mentioned what the changes were in the rule, but how will the basically the monitoring and regulation of the enforcement of that rule take effect once it actually goes into effect in October of 2024?
So it'll affect most systems starting January 2025, whenever the standard 6-month monitoring begins. But the tail end of those systems on 6-month monitoring for 2024, starting in October, they will be switching to the 5th-liter draw sampling. All of their sample sites have to be from a service line served by, or a site served by a lead service line. So that will be going into effect the second that October 1st rolls around. And before that, we will be doing as many public outreach opportunities as we can. We have additional information available on our website. We're trying to push that information out to everyone as much as possible, so that way everybody's ready for it whenever October 2024 does hit.
Great. And then I'm just going to throw it back to Carolyn a little bit, and just a real general question about so PFAS are considered forever chemicals. And I'm wondering if you could just touch a little bit on what that means to us as a, country, that it's a forever chemical.
Yeah, that's a great question. So PFAS were developed to last. They were developed as something, Teflon pan, to be able to last forever. So this chemical doesn't break down naturally in the environment. So it stays around, and it doesn't have anything that helps break it down. So really the only way to remove it is very specific treatment. There are specific treatment technologies. I mentioned before, they're very, very low limits that we're talking to treat for. So that's also very, very low limits to sample. It's a very, very small amount that can make an impact that we're taking a look at. So these chemicals were built to last, and that's exactly what they're doing as we're continuing to find them in our environment.
Great. So that is all the questions we have so far. If anybody else would like to ask a question, again, we have the Q&A open. But otherwise, Sheila, I think we can give a little bit of time back to the general session.
Great. So we're going to have everyone rejoin us a little early from all of the sessions and that we've had so far. And we'd love to, love to have Jeannie back on deck, and Nadan, if you're ready, and then also Carolyn and Adam, if you could stay on deck, and Ruth, so we can go through the next set of questions. And I'm going to turn this. I'll actually just go ahead and take this section for the audience questions. We have a few here, and Nadan and anyone else who wants to answer, I'm just going to start launching questions. We have multiple questions about funding. So I'll start with a question from an anonymous attendee who says, does IEPA expect to make additional updates to or expand the definition of disadvantaged community beyond the LSLR funding buckets?
It's a very good question, Sheila. Yep. So the short answer is yes. We are planning on reviewing our disadvantaged community definition outside of the lead service line program. The situation right now is we're just in the sort of I wouldn't say initial, but middle stages of that, having those discussions. But to answer your question, I think sometime next year, meaning in 2025, you will get an update where related to the disadvantaged community definition on the wastewater side and on the regular drinking water loan program.
Wonderful. So we have another question for Nadan as well. Or actually, yes, this is definitely for Nadan. So is the number of lead service lines as a percentage of all service lines a factor in the disadvantaged community designation?
I would say it is, and that is where the 7th criteria of our scoring metric comes into play, where we score your application based on the lead service line burden. That is where we will start to look at such criteria, percentage of your total lead service lines. So I would say yes, it is.
And I'm gonna go ahead and jump back a little bit to Adam Nutt. Adam, you have some additional information, I understand, about possible extensions for the upcoming deadlines for the lead service line inventories. Can you talk about what communities can do and what they need to do to reach out and engage if they're feeling like they're not quite there yet? And also, I want to open up that question to Carolyn as well, and if Jeannie's on deck as well. Both are folks who work with engineering firms, and Ruth as well, who's with Elevate, just to see if anyone has any information that can be shared around that.
So I can touch on that a little bit more. The extension process is due January 15th of next year, 2024. All that's going to be is just a simple email to either myself or the EPA's lead and copper inbox. We will get that email. We'll say back that we received it, and then we'll review it and either approve or deny that extension request. And that approval or denial will be on an official communication, both via email and in the mail back to the water system that requested it. There's no criteria for the request. You just have to simply contact us, let us know your system and that you would like a request. And at that point, we will review your initial service line inventory and then make our decision based off of that.
That's wonderful. And I was wondering if Jeannie or Carolyn can maybe address how to engage support if you need to get to IEPA, but you're not sure how to do it.
Yeah.
The resources that you have.
Well, I can give you a preliminary answer. I know with there's a lot of resources, and first let me just say that I always tell everyone in the funding world, just reach out to Nadan and Gary, and they will direct you to the right person. They're extremely responsive, and honestly, they really don't mind. They're there to get the job done. So calling them is not a burden. I'm sorry to speak for you, Nadan, but that's one thing that, you know, Gary and I have talked about extensively. There are also, what I've noticed is that many communities, especially with Build Up Cook and what we're doing with them, we're trying to position many of these municipalities to be, able to start working, to collect on the bipartisan infrastructure funding immediately when it's available next summer. And so we're really seeing that a lot of communities have hired an engineering firm, or their village engineer is working on this. So if you're in Cook County, you are also welcome to reach out to Build Up Cook. There is a website. So, I mean, just reach out to your county, reach out to IEPA. A lot of us engineering firms are in the business of doing this inventory work. Get help. Don't try to struggle through this on your own. It's really something that, a lot of us have a lot of experience doing, and we can do it quite quickly.
Sheila, I'll just add to that. That was great advice. I think one of the most important parts of building the inventory is, just like Nadan said, is, to get funding, you need to have the information and know where you're at with what your replacement needs are. But I think one of the most important parts is public education and helping the public understand why you're asking the questions, because we are looking at both the public and private side of the service to identify what that material is. and really starting by building trust with the public on why you're asking the question. You went back to Flint before the conversation, and there was a lot of distrust because of what happened with Flint. And by building that relationship with your community and residents and saying, this is why we're looking for this information, so we can build that inventory, work on a plan, get some funding, build that story. But that initial conversation with the public, I think, is really critical, and where we're seeing people have success by getting the information they need for their inventory.
That's a great point, Carolyn. I just want to add on that message should stay consistent. And that's
Yes.
really how the key to building trust.
Yeah.
And, that's a fantastic point.
Great. So thank you both. Thank you for everyone who participated in that answer. We have a related question, which is what advice, and this is for Adam, but also anyone on the call who's had experience in this process. So what advice can you give to communities about getting waivers from homeowners who are refusing to have their lead service line replaced? And this is open to Adam, but I also want to open it to other folks on the call who are supporting communities.
The waiver is for just an outright refusal to allow whoever's conducting that replacement onto the property for replacement purposes. If they're not allowing anyone to access the property and not allowing them to sign that waiver, then the community water supply should reach out to the Illinois Department of Public Health and let them know that they've had a refusal of access to the property, as well as a refusal by that homeowner to sign that waiver. So if the homeowner refuses to sign it and refuses access, that is the course of action, just to reach out to the public health and let them know of that scenario.
I'm going to throw this over to Ruth Kersey again to kind of address Leadcare Cook, and also if you have any suggestions regarding the specific question, feel free to engage.
Hi, I just wanted to make a clarification for the link that was put in the chat for Leadcare Cook County. So Leadcare Cook County is not, they are a partner with us in Cook County TAP. We're all part of the Cook County community trying to address the lead service line issue, but Cook County TAP will be developing their own website. I just wanted to point that out. But Leadcare Cook County is for any community in Cook County that is interested in getting lead service lines replaced in home childcare facilities, licensed in-home childcare facilities in Cook County. They should reach out to that program. There are resources. It's a soup to nut service, meaning they take care of everything, removing the lead service line, doing restorative, lawn care and landscape restoration afterwards. So check that out. And I just wanted to make sure that was clear, that there is a bit of a distinction between Leadcare Cook County and Cook County TAP, but they are, again, partnering to help address the lead service line situation. So thanks for that, Sheila. I'll throw it back to you.
Great. And can people reach out to you, Ruth, to understand some of the programs that Elevate has for supporting lead service line replacement?
Absolutely. Yeah, they can contact me at ruth.kersey@elevatenp.org. So the NP stands for nonprofit, just so you know. So elevatenp.org.
And Sheila, if I could go back to your question, if we still have time on that, I thought
Certainly.
Adam gave a great response. But in our experience working with communities and the homeowners, is a homeowner will say, well, I've had that service for 30 years. I've got no problems. Why would we need to do this? So I go back to the public education being really critical to building that story on why we're doing this, and the net benefit, the net good of replacing the service. And the other thing is, you have to get into people's homes to be able to do this replacement. So we've been really helping to educate people by making sure we document existing conditions really closely, so that we can assure people that the contractor will help make sure we get back to existing conditions, and make we try to find as many ways as possible for people to feel comfortable. There's a lot of different reasons that someone might, on initial thought, not want to allow people into their home. So trying to find those reasons that help make people feel as comfortable and educated as possible is really a great step for communities to take.
We have one more question. We actually have a couple of more questions that have come in. We're going to be able to get to one of them, which is a question about, it's a question about if you're on well water, has there been any research? Oh, okay, there's several questions that have come in, so I'm just going to grab the ones that we have answered. Sorry, is there any research showing where the majority of PFAS are coming from? Are the chemicals now banned? PFAS is a carcinogen, correct? So
yeah, there's a lot of different research going on. They are seeing some impacts that PFAS could have on a couple different types of cancer, impacts on pregnancy, impacts on thyroid, I believe. So there's different impacts that they're seeing. There's a lot of ongoing research on the health effects right now. In terms of where we're seeing it, it really could depend on location based on maybe a chemical manufacturer. Might have been near they have found it in some well water. It's not just surface water where they found it. I would say at this point, it's a great variety of potential for sources, unfortunately. So I go back to, again, really getting that sampling done, understanding what you're seeing in your own utility community, so you can make those decisions when the rules come through.
great, and I did want to just make sure that we answer this one question. So this is a question from one of our guests. He says, our village has several areas on well water. Would the cost associated with connecting these areas to our Lake Michigan systems be covered by drinking water loan programs? Is there a chance that there could be forgiveness on the part of those loans? So I just think this is important because we have to understand the variety of places where people are getting their drinking water, right? Jeannie, would you like to
So
jump in?
Sheila, I can take this one. I can take
Okay.
this one. So the drinking water loan program for Illinois SRF has a one well principal forgiveness loan program. That is where if a community, which sounds like they're just strictly on one well, we have a separate pot of funding available, where they can get up to $500,000 as a grant. They don't have to pay anything back. But at the same time, we do have to look at whether you're on the agency's one well criteria list. So if, the person that asked that question, if they want to reach out to me after this call, I'm happy to kind of find out a little bit more details. But to answer their question without knowing any more details, the agency does have a funding program that is 100% principal forgiven if they are on a one well criteria. So yes, we do have the means available. It's just a matter of understanding the details.
And I know I added into the chat there that, I could also assist, especially if you're located in Cook County. Through Build Up Cook, we are actually supporting municipalities by helping with the paperwork that Nadon would need to do his part. So you can feel free to reach out to me as well with any questions.
This has been a really great Q&A section. We're going to move to our break now because we have another informative hour that we're going to fill with water. So please take time, have a drink of water, tea, coffee, or snacks. We'll be coming back at 11:10. And I want to thank all of our wonderful panelists. This has been so informative. So contact information is going to be available in slides and in the chat. Please reach out to folks. Thank you. Greetings, everyone. That's gonna welcome people back slowly from this break. We're really excited to jump into our next session. And we're gonna shower you with a wondrous amount of wonderful information. I'm really trying to put these water puns in. So we're going to turn this next segment over to Justin Keller with Elevate. And he's going to lead our panel on pressing issues in water affordability. Justin, I'm handing you the oars to start rowing this boat.
We're going to dive back in.
Well done.
All right, thank you. I'm Justin Keller. I'm a strategist on the water programs at Elevate. Next slide. I'm going to give an overview of water affordability in the region, and then we've got a great panel discussion lined up. Next slide. A few years ago, Elevate, MPC, and Illinois Indiana Sea Grant looked at water affordability in northeastern Illinois. We used the EPA's definition of affordability, which says that if less than 4.5% of a household's income goes towards their water and sewer bills, it can be said to be affordable. The EPA method was never designed as a measure of household level of affordability, and there are a lot of criticisms about it, such as 4.5% is completely arbitrary, and a single metric for such a complex issue is wholly inappropriate. Understanding its shortcomings, we use this to just have a comparison of water affordability in the region. And here's one of the analysis from our report. The map on the left is using median household income, and the municipalities in red had at least one census tract where households were paying more than 4.5% of their income on water and sewer bills. You can see it's Chicago and some Cook County municipalities, but largely water affordability is not an issue in the region. We felt that median income is potentially masking the extent of the issue, so we also looked at income quintiles and focused on the lowest income quintile, or the bottom 20% of income earners, and the map on the right shows that result. Again, municipalities in red have at least one census tract where households are paying more than 4.5% for their water and sewer bills, but instead of median income, now it's looking at the lowest income quintile, and says that maybe water affordability is a potentially significant issue in the region. Next slide. We're certainly not the only ones to be looking into this. According to a long-running analysis by Janice Beecher at Michigan State University, the cost of water and sewer bills is rising faster than the rate of inflation as measured by the Consumer Price Index, as well as rising faster and higher than other public utilities. There's a lot of reasons for this, including higher energy costs, higher material costs, higher labor costs, and a host of other reasons. But the cost of water is going up. Next slide. This can have impacts on customers, of course, in terms of a higher water burden. And as the price of water continues to go up, the share of customers that are experiencing a burden from their water bills is also increasing. This can result in financial strain, both from those water bills as well as from penalties and fees for late payment. Those can have health and psychological impacts. Ultimately, unpaid bills can result in the loss of service. And if service is disconnected for a long time, it can result in degradation of the premise plumbing, since those pipes are intended to have water flowing through them. There can be problems if it's not, and other impacts for customers. The next slide. And it's not just customers, but also utilities that are impacted by water affordability in terms of higher administrative costs for trying to collect on those bills and the debt, the staff time for posting notice of shutoff and then going out to disconnect and later reconnect service. When a significant proportion of customers are struggling to afford their bills, that can result in decreased revenue stability, which in turn can impact maintenance and operations of the system. So a significant issue requiring serious attention. Next slide. And I'm excited to be joined today by two folks from organizations that have been looking into this issue. Alex Singer is research manager at the Metropolitan Planning Council, and Laura Medweed is a postdoctoral research associate at the Government Finance Research Center at UIC. Welcome to you both. I think we can take the slides down, and I've got a first question to you, Laura. So thanks to the hard legislative work of Representative LaShawn Ford and Representative Lindsay LaPointe, the state funded a study of water rate setting in Illinois to say what's going on. And that's being led by UIC. And I wonder if you can tell us a bit about what that study entails.
Sure, thanks, Justin. So that's correct. So through our water rate setting study, we're tasked with addressing 7 key themes related to water provision and affordability. So a selection of these themes for time-sensitive purposes are the components of a water bill, the reasons for increases in water rates, the definition of affordability throughout the state and any variations in that definition, the extent to which state or local policies drive water rate increases, challenges within economically disadvantaged communities, and finally, opportunities for intergovernmental coordination. So how our team tackled understanding those 7 key themes is first we collected publicly available data related to water facility characteristics, social, economic, and demographic characteristics of communities served, and information related to the supply chain network that municipalities operate within to provide their water and wastewater services. Secondly, the GFRC team coded approximately 100 municipal ordinances to look for systematic trends in water bill penalties that may act as barriers to water access and affordability, but beyond the levels of household water bills. And lastly, to kind of round out this knowledge, we conducted in-depth interviews with public works directors and finance directors across the Lake Michigan service area. So one thing to note is our first report that was published is focused exclusively on the Lake Michigan area, and then we'll tackle the rest of the state in our next and upcoming report.
Yeah, so not a light undertaking by any means. And that first report runs to over 100 pages. And as you said, covers the Lake Michigan service area. That was completed earlier this year. So congratulations on that. And I wonder if you can just give an overview of some of the key findings from that report.
Sure, thanks. So I'll touch on some of the key findings, but I think we've linked to the entire report that is much more comprehensive. But just to give you kind of a sense of some of the main findings in terms of water bills, we see there's a high level of variation in the level of detail and information presented on household water bills. So whether there's different line items for different charges, whether municipalities are using that as a communication tool to their customers. In terms of water rates and water rate increases, we find there are 4 key areas that influence water rate increases and levels of water rates across the service area. So the top one, which may be no surprise, is infrastructure failures and increased maintenance costs for infrastructure and operations. The second one is debt burden. So a lot of municipalities are increasing their water rates in order for them to pay down debt that they already have. Political considerations, so whether municipalities are willing and able to increase their water rates to cover those necessary increases in infrastructure and operations. And lastly, for municipalities that are purchasing water wholesale, several of them are passing along costs associated with those increased wholesaler costs that those municipalities are charged. In terms of our statistical analysis, we find the type of water purchasing agreement for the municipality is associated with higher water rates. So whether they're purchasers, the presence of health-based violations and greater dependence on property taxation are also related to increased water rates as well. Another finding that was statistically significant is that municipalities are sometimes using their sewer rates to subsidize their drinking water rates. Now, moving along to network and supply chain results, we find that there's a high degree of network fragmentation, and that's associated with significant variations in water price levels. So while these intergovernmental coordination efforts are leading to economies of scale, those are created through a regional networked approach, those benefits are mostly captured by the large water producers, and the wholesale water providers are not often enjoying as many economies of scale benefits. However, where those purchasers are along the supply chain doesn't explain these differences in water rate variation. A last finding for the network and supply chain analysis is that intergovernmental approaches to cooperative purchasing often result in less variation in water rates and slightly lower residential rates within those intergovernmental cooperation agreements. So there's clusters of similar water rates within groups of municipalities participating in each agreement. In terms of the ordinances, so when we coded the ordinances and looked for systematic trends, we do find kind of a compounding effect in penalties that municipalities are able to charge their water customers according to their municipal ordinances. We find municipalities that have higher household water bills are recommending that customers are able to be considered delinquent sooner, so they have less time to pay their water bills before they're considered delinquent. And these municipalities with higher household water bills are also less likely to have access to payment assistance programs. In terms of community characteristics, the percentage of poverty in municipalities are weakly associated with a longer duration until shutoff. However, the higher proportion of racial and ethnic minorities are associated with a shorter duration of shutoff. So they have to pay their bills in a shorter period of time before they are legally allowed to, municipalities are legally allowed to shut off their water and household water services. To supplement those findings of our statistical analysis, we discussed with many municipal water providers to kind of understand their approaches and understanding of water affordability and major challenges that they face. In terms of the definition of water affordability, no municipalities had one strong definition that they used to kind of color how they determine their water rates, but there were three main categories in how they described their affordability. So the first is a water system perspective. They would say something like, we're charging the lowest rate possible in order to keep up with operations and maintenance. Secondly, they use benchmarking. So they would consider their municipalities to be providing affordable water if their water rates were similar to their neighbors. So they were, if it wasn't significantly higher, they would say that since their neighbors are charging similar rates, that they are also affordable. Third, a household expenditure approach, they might have compared water rates to other household expenditures, for example, broadband, or saying that a cable bill would typically be higher than residential water rates. So that's how they determined that their water bills were affordable. In terms of the actual water rate setting practice, several municipalities use water rate studies to inform their process and add validation to necessary water rate increases. Third-party consultants or proprietary software was also employed, but these were used mostly by higher income municipalities. Some mentioned that engineering firms did provide suggestions for water rate increases, but these recommendations sometimes get passed into law via municipal ordinances after review by water boards or other elected officials. However, these proposals are not always enforced or passed into law by municipal ordinances. And the last kind of result we found a high degree of variability in the level of intergovernmental coordination that municipalities agree in. Municipalities talk to us not only in terms of the formal agreements through water commissions and joint action water agencies, but also kind of informal information sharing, knowledge sharing, sharing staff or other resources. But access to these types of intergovernmental coordination benefits varied depending on the level of capacity in the municipality. So that's a summary of our findings.
I'm so sorry to give you only 5 minutes to try to summarize everything that's in there. The link is already dropped in the chat. So I encourage everybody to get cozy and spend some time with it. There's a lot of information in there. And yeah, thanks. We want to switch from the regional focus to look at local analyses. So MPC, Elevate, and Illinois Indiana Sea Grant conducted water affordability analyses in partnership with 4 municipalities directly. That was Chicago, Evanston, Harvey, and Broadview. And hi, Alec. What did those analyses entail, and what were some of the key takeaways there?
Yeah, so I worked on the Broadview and Harvey analyses. So I can speak to those a little better, but I can kind of speak to all of them conceptually. And so those sort of at a smaller, more focused scale than what Laura was just explaining, looked at these municipalities and water habits through both a qualitative and a quantitative lens. So from a quantitative perspective, this involved taking all of the water billing data for all of the customer accounts for whatever the study period was. 2 years, it kind of ranged for each of the municipalities based on when we did the analysis. Cleaning that data, isolating just the residential accounts, and analyzing it for patterns in billing amounts, payment activity, and water debt. In the cases of Evanston and Chicago, we did a little more analysis looking at some racial equity and income considerations. Those we did not do as deeply for Harvey and Broadview, given they're smaller municipalities and there's less rich data available from the federal government. So those things were a little more challenging. But looking at sort of all of those patterns, we compared it to the 4.5% threshold that Justin explained a little bit earlier to try to identify segments of the population where water was affordable or not affordable. In conjunction with that, we did some qualitative analysis. So we engaged residents, small business owners, elected officials, and government staff to get sort of a 360 view of perceptions, challenges, successes in the local water systems to help inform the quantitative analysis that we did. Some key takeaways from those that I think would be relevant is one, relief programs need to be targeted. So in Harvey, we determined that 2.3% of customers held 45% of the outstanding water debt. So it was a very small slice of the customer base that held almost half of the outstanding debt. And so that makes it, in some senses, very easy to identify, okay, here is the population that we should determine how to engage, reach out to, understand their needs so that we can design relief programs that are well-suited and helpful for them. I think one thing to hold with that as well is sort of making sure that you are designing relief programs or assistance programs that can accommodate both homeowners and renters. There are different challenges in accessing those populations, and making sure you're centering that is important. I think another thing that intuitively makes sense, but was really interesting to see through the data analysis, was that there is definitely a relationship between high bills and high debt. So in Harvey, we determined that customers who had over $300 in outstanding debt had monthly bills that were twice as high as customers with only $50 or less in debt. And so sort of connecting to the point that Laura was making, where municipalities where people tend to have these higher bills and shorter delinquency periods, you can see some intersections with there, where customers who have higher debt, higher bills, I can't speak to how that plays out in Harvey and Broadview, but thinking about all of those things together, you really want to be intentional about the dynamics that you're putting customers in. So I think that keeping in mind the relationships between billing amounts and debt amounts, municipalities can be proactive in making sure that customers aren't getting into sort of a feedback loop where they are stuck navigating both paying off high debt and managing high bills, and then potentially implicated with some shorter delinquency requirements.
Thanks, Ellie. Yeah, so you're already touching on a bunch of the recommendations that we made in those reports. So I'll ask Laura, from your analysis, what are some of the other things that municipalities can do to improve water affordability?
Sure, thanks. So ours come in kind of three key topics. So first of all is ensuring communication standards for water bills. So that's the public outreach and education. We suggest that water bills use clear and accessible language to comprehensively explain why residents are charged what they are for their water bills. Secondly, in terms of the public outreach component, describing why water bills are increasing, what this increased revenue will go towards, and then thirdly, listing potential potentially available water affordability programs where they exist so that residents are able to sign up for water affordability programs if they are eligible. And the second recommendation is increase municipal capacity, expertise, and knowledge. So municipalities can build capacity and track information to understand these communities' concerns about water affordability and water quality so that they can best target those funds. And secondly, regional and statewide convenings of water operators, municipal leaders, and elected officials, similarly to what we are doing today. I think that's really helpful and a good step in the right direction. And then third, clear guidelines issued to municipalities for developing rainy day funds. And having additional support be provided to achieve those goals and for financial planning, particularly for disadvantaged communities.
Some street cleaning going on your street today? That we heard you great, no problem. We're fast approaching the Q&A section, so I would encourage everybody to find that Q&A button and drop any questions in there. We'll get to as many as we can. But another question for you, Laura, you just started talking about disadvantaged communities, and I believe you had recommendations for how the state can support those municipalities. Can you briefly touch on those?
Yes, I will be as brief as possible. Yeah, thank you for that question. So when we were talking to municipal water providers, they, especially in disadvantaged communities, they mentioned that there's higher operational costs associated with water provision, a lack of access to loans. Sometimes there's a stronger resistance to engaging in those higher necessary water rate increases because their populations just can't take on that burden financially. So at the state level, we recommend uniform and widely available water affordability programs so that municipalities are able to kind of streamline water affordability relief for struggling residents. Secondly, low-cost loans or grants to communities and providing technical assistance to be increased at the state level. So there's a lot of administrative burden that municipalities are facing that act as a barrier to receiving those grants and loans. And in terms of intergovernmental coordination, some municipalities are still uncertain about engaging in intergovernmental coordination. So there's a lack of transparency in wholesale pricing, limited staff capacity, there's financial risk. So having a statewide coordination program to help reduce those barriers to engaging in intergovernmental organization and cooperation would really help struggling municipalities to benefit from those economies of scale.
Thanks, Laura. And Alec, I think it's the last question to you, acknowledging that some municipalities don't have the staff capacity or expertise to take this on. For those that do want to look into water affordability on their own, what are some steps they can take to get started?
Yeah, are you thinking more in terms of like recommendations that we have for the municipalities, or like how they would go about the process of assessing?
The process, so like standing up a water affordability analysis.
Cool. Yeah, so I think my thoughts on that sort of fall in two categories. One would be kind of overall considerations as you approach this, and then the other would maybe be a little more technical and from my perspective. So hopefully relevant for you, maybe a little wonky, but I'll try to keep it accessible. I think to the first bucket of kind of overall considerations, the first thing which Laura also kind of touched on is water affordability does not exist in a vacuum. When you're looking at affordability, it's really important to consider how shutoff policies will impact customer behavior patterns. Just because people are paying their water bills consistently, if there is a shutoff policy, that is a really strong incentive to pay your water bills. And so just looking at payment activity in a vacuum without considering the external forces shaping that is not going to be a meaningful analysis. So that is one thing to kind of hold as you are doing this. How do external policies impact customer behavior? The other pieces that I think are really important is one, making sure that you are building and sustaining forums for strong community engagement. One of the challenges in this project was the qualitative engagement, so getting really robust interaction with different stakeholders. And so making sure that you are fostering spaces where there is a strong ethos of community engagement so that when the time comes to do this project, that is ready. And those sort of spaces will be applicable to a variety of other endeavors that you are undertaking. So that's just good generally to have strong spaces for community engagement. I think another piece to consider is where this fits into your priorities and where this fits into sort of larger activities that your municipality is undertaking. So in some of the studies we did, this was sort of an entree to a rate setting conversation, so re-examining rate structures. So it's great to get an understanding of affordability considerations, challenges with the water system as you are moving into that conversation. On the flip, if you are undertaking a lot of other things, this can be a relatively intensive process depending on how you structure it. And so in some cases, we had periods where municipalities were really engaged in a time-sensitive, high-resource project. And so that could shuffle the timeline a bit. So just think about, what is this building into? Are we ready to do this? Are there other things that may sort of impact our ability to do this? On a more pedantic and technical level, I think one piece to consider is what form does your data take? How complicated is your rate structure? How is your data exported? In some instances, we had really clear rate structures, so it was very easy to analyze. In others, it was challenging to pull out residential customers because there were various sort of rate structures that were grouping them in different places. So just thinking about the way your data is structured and how it is exported. In one instance, the data provided to us from the municipality came in text files, which is like a Word document, but not a Word document. And so just thinking about analyzing Word documents, that was a challenge to get the data clean and ready. So as you are thinking about moving into this, it is good to think about how is our data structured and like what form is it going to come out in and how easy will that be to clean and analyze, and do we have the capacity to do that, or will we need to lean on an external partner?
Okay, great. I wish that we had a ton more time to talk about this. We've got about 8 minutes and we want to make sure that we leave time for Q&A. So everybody find that Q&A button and drop your questions in there, but a couple came in to me as direct messages. These are not easy ones. So first one, what kinds of support? I think this is kind of what you were just talking about, Alec. What kinds of support are there for municipalities trying to get a better understanding of their customer billing information? What kind of technical assistance or external government partner support is there?
That's a great question. I may actually lean on you a bit, Justin, to answer that. I think that like the one starting place potentially is some of the work that Elevate and MPC have done to kind of wrap your head around like how other people are thinking about this. MPC, Elevate, and the Sea Grant also have a really great webpage on water affordability. And so that may be a good place to sort of think about like, how do we want to structure this? What types of things are we looking for? And so those would be recommendations of models. But in terms of like direct technical assistance programs, yeah, I'm going to be a bad panelist and kick that back to the moderator.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in as a panelist myself, because I worked on some of these projects in partnership with Alec, and it was great. I would say that there are some great resources available in addition to municipalities that you can work with your public accountant, you can work with your engineering firm. But I would point in particular to the Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant analyses of different types of customer assistance programs. That's a great overview. The NRDC also produced a great report that talked about different types of water affordability programs, and they recently released a tool to help municipalities and utilities analyze the business case of implementing a solution like that. So it's a spreadsheet-based tool where you can plug in a lot of information and help you see what the cost might be, as well as the potential impact of an assistance program in terms of how much revenue you might be able to recoup. So that helps you to make the case with the elected officials to push forward with then working with your accountant or engineering firm. Laura, anything you wanted to add on that one?
I think that was really comprehensive. Yeah, thank you. We did look a little bit into the LIWAP water affordability program that Sunset, and we're really in favor of those kind of state level water affordability programs, so that customers can kind of understand on a broader scale of whether they can qualify for water affordability resources or get aid from their water bills, when it's such kind of a case by case basis by municipalities right now, and there are very few municipalities that even offer water affordability programs. So we do encourage, more state involvement in creating a uniform water affordability program.
Great. Another one that came in through direct messages talking about leak repair. It's a question for either of you, that whoever wants to jump in. How is leak repair factored into the affordability conversation?
I could just kind of briefly talk about what some of our findings. So I kind of, through coding the municipal ordinances, we found that most municipalities have something specified within their ordinances that, regardless of whether it's a leak or something else, if there is a large water use or a water debt due to a leak, the responsibility still lies with the municipal consumer to pay that water bill. Only, a small handful, single digits of municipalities had coded into their ordinances that they could potentially receive some kind of relief if there was kind of extenuating circumstances that way. But we did find that a large amount of that significant water debt is potentially a result of leaks on properties, and there just is not the capacity so far for municipalities to provide any kind of assistance in those kinds of events.
Yeah, I can jump in as a panelist again, that some municipalities don't have any type of notification system, so the customer finds out they potentially have a leak when the bill arrives, and at that point it might be several $100s. Others generate reports daily, and somebody gets on the phone to call people to just notify them of a spike in usage. Other municipalities have an automated system where people can receive an email of a spike in usage. There are different options out there, but I think that part of what Alec was talking about, of identifying who has the highest amount of debt and trying to identify what the situation is that's resulting in that. So really diving in again to identify what the specific challenges are, so that programs can be tailored to meet those needs. Knowing that most municipalities would not have the funding to go in and fix somebody's leaky toilet, by at least trying to identify resources that may be available or help the customer to connect with those themselves. I think maybe I will ask the last question that I didn't get to ask, which is to Laura. You'll get the last word. I just think that a lot of our audience will be curious to know, you talked about the Lake Michigan service area part of the analysis, but what's next for the Government Finance Research Center?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Justin. So essentially, we're already moving ahead, looking forward to report 2, where we will tackle the same 7 themes that I mentioned at the beginning of the panel. So we will be tackling those issues downstate Illinois. And so we're looking at other kind of characteristics and what the different context is in these municipalities that may be more rural. And there might be more variation in a lot of the types of community characteristics in industry and water sources downstate. So we kind of have a big task ahead of us to start getting information on competing water resources, a lot heavier reliance on groundwater and that kind of thing. So to understand kind of key themes and understanding the water rate setting process outside of the Lake Michigan service area.
And did you mention what's the timeline for that?
So that report is due in December of 2024. So we're just kind of in the very beginning stages of collecting data downstate.
All right, sounds great. Well, Laura, Alec, thank you both for being part of this panel, and we will kick it back to Sheila. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Alec and Laura again, and also Justin for both being a moderator and a content provider. That is not an easy task, but I did ask I did ask Justin and Carrie a lot of water for us today. Had to get one more pun in before we end this session. So our next section is going to be information from the Chicago Department of Water Management's cost of service model rollout. So the Chicago Department of Water Management is in the process of implementing the AAWA's cost of service model for its wholesale customer base. And our next speaker, Dave Cohn, will provide information on this model and where to go for additional information within the department, as well as how the new Chicago Water Partners Advisory Council will be a part of the governance structure of this important aspect of the process. So Dave Cohn is Deputy Commissioner of Regional Partnerships with the City of Chicago's Department of Water Management. Links to his bio are in the chat, and we're going to go ahead and hand it over to Dave for this section of the presentation. Take it away. If you have questions for him, his contact information will be in the chat at the end of this section.
Okay, well, good morning. And Sheila, thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity to participate in this MPC program, which could not possibly be more timely or important for our region. MPC has a long history of promoting regional collaboration and thoughtful planning when it comes to so many aspects of our public life and governmental affairs. And this program is consistent with that. And it's also dovetails quite nicely with what I'd like to discuss a little bit this morning. As you indicated, there are a couple of things that I'm going to touch on today. Primarily, I'm going to focus on the city's commitment to transition to the American Water Works Association, or AWWA, cost of service rate methodology, and also spend just a couple of minutes talking about the new Chicago Water Partners Advisory Council, which is being established in tandem with that rollout to facilitate greater regional collaboration. But today I'm going to focus primarily on the former, the Waterworks Association cost of service methodology. And really, these two initiatives together represent the city's commitment to pursue greater regional collaboration and ensure water rate stability for everyone in the region that we serve. So if we could go to the next slide. I thought I'd start with just a quick overview of the Chicago water and sewer system. Chicago is the preeminent water supplier, public water utility for Northeastern Illinois. And as the slide mentions, provides water to about 5.5 million people in Northeastern Illinois. In fact, about 40% of everyone who lives in our state receives water directly or indirectly from the city of Chicago's water system, including about 120 suburbs of the city. To provide that service, we treat and distribute about 700 million gallons of water each day. And some of the lower bullet points on this slide sort of review the infrastructure associated with that endeavor, including the two water intake, what we refer to as cribs. You may have seen them. They're about 2 miles off the shore out in Lake Michigan, where the water is collected and brought in for treatment and purification. We have 2 water purification plants, the largest of which, where I work here, the Jardine Water Purification Plant, serves the northern section of our system roughly, and we have a southern plant, the Sawyer Water Purification Plant, and they have enormous water intake, treatment, and purification capability. Our system also relies upon 12 water pumping stations to provide water service to the city of Chicago and all of the other communities throughout our region and water systems that we serve. And some of the other details on the catch basins, the fire hydrants, 4,600 miles of sewer mains. It's quite an extensive water system, one of the largest in the world. And as the picture on the right shows, that's an aerial view of the Jardine Water Purification Plant just north of Navy Pier, which is the world's largest conventional water treatment facility. So we go to the next slide, please. To begin with, when we talk about water rates, I thought I'd provide just a little bit of background about what the current water rate system is for the city of Chicago and how that dovetails into our transition to the cost of service rate. The current water rate system that the city has in place, which has been in place for many, many decades, is a flat rate system. Everyone pays the exact same rate for water. Currently, that is $4.55 per 1,000 gallons, and that rate is adjusted under the Chicago Municipal Code each year by the Consumer Price Index or 5%, whichever is the lower. And as I mentioned earlier, the city is committed to transition to the cost of service rate methodology by January 2030. And our goal here is to establish a system of predictable water rates that are transparent and equitable for all of our suburban water customers. Another way of putting it is that the water rate setting methodology we're going to adopt, we aim to make that as clear and transparent as the water itself. The broad principles of the AWWA cost of service methodology are really twofold. One is that the revenue that the city generates through its water rates should cover the cost of operating our system and providing water service to everyone, and that the charge for water service for all of our wholesale customers in the suburban area should represent the service that they receive. And that is, the rate really reflects the components of the system that are really needed or used and useful, is the AWWA nomenclature, to provide the water service to a given community. The analogy that I have often used is that this is sort of like those Liberty Mutual insurance commercials that we're all too familiar with. You only pay for the coverage that you need. This is really the water rate equivalent of that. So the idea is that your water service and your water rate should reflect only the aspects of the system that are needed to get water to customer A or customer B or customer C. And at the bottom of the slide, we rely upon the American Water Works manual, which is the guidance for water systems across our nation that use that. It was first developed by AWWA in 1954 and has been updated regularly ever since. And there are a couple of important appellate court decisions that affect public water suppliers in Illinois that also govern water rate setting, and those are known broadly as the Niles 1 and Niles 2 appellate court decisions. And really those decisions boil down to giving us two fundamental principles for water rate setting by a public supplier like the city. Number one, the rate should be reasonable and should reflect the costs of operating and maintaining the system. And the second principle is that those rates have to be applied equitably and fairly to all customers on a non-discriminatory basis. So everyone is treated exactly the same with respect to the water rates. Let's go to the next slide if we could. Excuse me. And as I said, the cost of service methodology that AWWA has developed and refined over the years is considered the gold standard for creating equitable water rates by public water suppliers, and provides a more transparent and accurate approach to determine what those rates should be. And again, the cost of service methodology broadly has two fundamental tenets. One is that the cost is based on the actual cost incurred by the water supplier to deliver water to that customer. So a custom water rate for each customer of the system on the wholesale level. And it is used by many other public water suppliers to determine wholesale customer rates. And that third point, bullet point that is bolded there lists some of the other communities that currently use the AWWA methodology, including our neighbor Evanston to the north, as well as Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and several others. And one other point I would make is that under the methodology, when the city does make its transition, we intend to retain provisions that would ensure stable and predictable water rates and to prevent large fluctuations in rate or large increases from year to year. That is to say, we want to maintain the kind of predictability and stability that is provided under the current rate cap that is under our current municipal code in the flat rate system. So we aim to maintain that kind of stability when we move to the AWWA method. If we could move to the next slide, please. This is a kind of a 30,000-foot view of the AWWA methodology and how it works. Basically, this guides the determination of the revenue requirements of the system. What do we need to maintain and operate the Chicago water system? And how that cost, the revenue requirement that's shown on the screen, How that was used will be used to calculate the share of that expense in the form of individual water rates for each customer. And again, it will result in a wholesale water rate of so much per 1,000 gallons. And as the right hand of the slide indicates, the idea is, again, that the water rates are developed for each customer based on the specific facilities or components of the system that are used and useful, that's the AWWA terminology, to provide water service to that customer. So let's move to the next slide. The graph on the right basically is a depiction of the Chicago water system, and this shows the kinds of data points that are used to provide inputs to the AWWA methodology and calculate the rates, including what are referred to as cost centers, the various components of the system, and the cost of maintaining and operating those, including the pumping stations, the infrastructure, as well as the administrative costs involved in providing water service. And just keep moving. If we go to the next slide, please. Again, very dense slide. Don't mean for anyone to try and read all of this, but basically the boxes that you see on the left-hand side provide a more detailed view of the costs and expenses, these cost centers that are used in the methodology to determine the system's revenue requirements that were noted on that earlier slide. So this again is pursuant to the approach outlined in the AWWA manual, which is that gold standard. If we could go to the next slide, please. This is briefly just one slide about the other major part of the Chicago's water initiative here, which is establishment of this new body called the Chicago Water Partners Advisory Council. It was established in 2022 to move along and foster greater regional collaboration. And this organization includes representatives of all of our suburban water customers and the water systems that we serve, and it meets quarterly. And we have been meeting on a regular basis and provides recommendations to the commissioner of this department on water policy and operations. And among some of its responsibilities, as you'll see at the bottom of the slide, it reviews ongoing operational, financial, and capital improvement data from our system, gets regular reports on the operations, the budget, and the maintenance schedules to give us feedback on that, and reviews and provides comments on our capital improvement program plans, as well as the annual cost of service study that the city will promulgate to help establish water rates. And finally, and very importantly, to advance regional collaboration and sharing of industry best practices among all partners of the water system. A good reference point for this is the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, which is a consortium of over 270 communities, including the city of Chicago, that meets regularly to talk about issues involving municipal governance. We can all do this job better, and we can all learn from one another. And I think that that's really a fundamental point here that I will conclude with, and that is the city is committed to engaging in true regional collaboration and partnership so that we can move forward together and address some of these difficult challenges in partnership. And with that, I tried to maintain my time constraints here. I want to pass it back to Sheila. I thank you very much for this opportunity. My contact information is on the screen, and I know there'll be other information in the chat, but I look forward to continuing this dialogue. And Sheila, I turn the mic back over to you now.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you, Dave. We have a poll that we're going to launch in 2 slides, but we're going to skip this poll for right now and move on to the next slide. So I just want to make sure that folks are still on the call. We have our next event on November 9th. That is the same time next week. There was a lot of points that will follow into the deep dives that we're doing. We're going to do a deep dive with municipal leaders who are actually implementing lead service inventory, lead service line inventories, and also talking about regional collaboration. How do you collaborate across municipalities in an equitable and fair way, and how do you get through that process? So those are our deep dive topics for November 9th. And for Thursday, December 7th, we invite municipal leaders, directors of public works, municipal representatives on the call. Please register. That's an in-person event. It has limited capacity. We're really focusing on elected leaders and municipal representatives, and we'd love to see you there. There are links in the chat for both of those events. And finally, we're going to ask you if you have another 2 minutes we're going to launch a poll. We want to know how we did today. What did you learn? As you can see right now, these are some of the folks who will be in the next session, and that will include Mayor Matt Brawley. We'll have Mayor Katrina Thompson, Allison Swisher from Joliet, who is the Director of Public Works, Dante Sawyer from the Village of Hazelcrest. We'll have Russ Reitfeld, who is Director of Engineering for the Village of Skokie, and other folks who are really expert to be able to kind of pull us together into this process and really deep dive into these topics. So we did snippets on this section. We're going to do deep dives next. Poll. If you've got 2 more minutes and you could just stay online with us, please fill out our poll. We're going to launch that poll now. And go ahead and just let us know how we did. It's okay. We do have an option at the bottom here that says, I didn't learn anything new. I'm hoping you don't say that, but if you do, it's okay. We are happy to get any feedback that you have to send. Thank you so very much to all the panelists and everyone who joined us today. We really appreciate you. And we're swimming in this water together. And I think that's one of the most important messages for our region. How do we create this community of efficacy for our shared resource, which is the water that we drink? We appreciate your time. Thank you. And thank you for filling out our poll today. We hope to see you next week. And for municipal elected officials, for your directors of public works and other folks representing municipalities on the call, please join us December 7th. We're going to feed you. You're going to get to be in person with folks from IEPA and other technical assistance supports. We look forward to hearing from you.